everyone, welcome back to the Bravo Docket. We are finally getting back into the Marco lawsuits.
One thing I want to bring up real quick is that when we cover some of these more sometimes controversial things that people have very strong opinions on, we are talking about it from the perspective of lawyers. Yes, we're fans of the show, and yes, we're individual people with our own opinions, but really when we talk about the strength or weakness of someone's argument or what connotations certain facts might have, we're talking about that from our perspective as lawyers, how a judge is going to look at it, how we think it might hold up under a court of law, whether or not something creates an issue of fact, how we think a jury might respond. So Ceci and I have always strived to do with this podcast is to be fair and give both sides and kind of give you some insight into how practicing lawyers think about things when we read these types of either complaints or allegations. We're trying to lay everything out, explain how it might be seen by both sides, and then let you come to your own conclusion. So if you hear us speaking about something and you are disappointed about the take on it, that's fine, but that's coming from our understanding of how lawyers and the law look at something. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's our opinion.
It's also like just because we take a position doesn't mean that everyone else has to take it or that it's the correct position to take either.
Right.
You know?
Right. We think it's more interesting when we both take different sides on something and we sort of debate that out the way lawyers would. Because as lawyers, a lot of times when you're practicing law, there's the moral thing, but then there's also what's legal. And sometimes those don't really coalesce. And that's just the reality of how the legal world works. And we think most people are pretty interested in hearing that sort of debate.
So this will be our third episode on the Marco lawsuit against Erika Jayne and her assistants and everyone, Amex, Secret Service. So if you haven't listened to those, for some background, we recommend listening to them. In those episodes, we go through the complaint. So for the background, you need to go back and listen to those. However, as a brief little summary, these are the legal claims that Chris Sala, who is one of the two designers in Marco, has brought and who he's brought them against. So against the Secret Service, he claims that they violated his constitutional rights to be free from unreasonable search and seizures under the Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment due process clauses. He says that they were involved in instigating and causing a baseless criminal arrest and the indictment, which led to him being criminally charged. Against Erika, Leah, and Mikey, the claims are malicious prosecution for instigating and causing a baseless criminal arrest and fabricating evidence. Against Amex and Grimm, who's an Amex employee, it's aiding and abetting malicious prosecution. Against Erika, Leah, Mikey, Amex, and Grimm is a conspiracy to commit malicious prosecution. We were really focused on Chris's allegations against the defendants, but now we're going to get into what Erika's arguments are against those claims. So she filed a motion to strike. It's an anti-SLAPP, which we've talked about anti-SLAPPs a lot before in the past. California has one of the strongest anti-SLAPP laws. Not every state has anti-SLAPP protections, and it's brought by the defendant. And the defendant is saying that the reason that the lawsuit was brought was to stifle free speech. So what you have to show is that you're being sued for any act in furtherance of your right of petition or free speech under the United States Constitution or the California Constitution in connection with a public issue. Some of those things are like statements before a legislative, executive, or judicial proceeding, statements made in connection with an issue under consideration by a governmental body, statements made in a place open to the public or a public forum in connection with an issue of public interest, and any other conduct in furtherance of the exercise of free speech or petition rights in connection with a public issue or an issue of public interest. If a defendant can prove that the lawsuit was brought based on protected speech or protected activity, then it goes back to the plaintiff to prove that they will. I've always thought that's really interesting because then when the judge rules on the anti-SLAPP, you get a preview of whether or not they think your claims are going to succeed. It's very fascinating.
It really is.
So then if the defendant doesn't succeed in proving that they're going to succeed with their causes of action, then the lawsuit gets dismissed completely. Just gone. Because then the court's saying that it was based on protected speech.
And if you are really interested in this and you haven't listened to some of our older episodes, we cover this in depth with the episode where Tamra and Shannon Bedore got sued by, what was his name? I dislike him so much I forget his name.
Jim
Bellino?
Yeah, Jim Bellino.
We really talk about the California SLAPP law in detail, and we explain how Shannon got the case dismissed. Now, it took a lot of legal fees and it was very stressful, but she did get it dismissed. We hope she got attorney's fees for that.
Oh, yeah. Anytime you get it dismissed based on anti-SLAPP, you get attorney's fees.
Yeah. So that kind of turns everything around. And the purpose of that is to prevent people with the resources to use the legal system in order to stop public participation or stop free speech because they have access to that. So it really turns it on its head and is like, you better be able to back it up, because if you can't, then it'll be turned around on you and you'll end up paying the other side's legal fees.
Yeah. You could also do a slapback lawsuit in California, which means if you succeed on the anti-SLAPP motion, you not only get it dismissed, you get attorney's fees. Then you can sue them saying that the lawsuit was filed to harass or silence the speaker.
Ooh.
It's very interesting, and it's a huge consideration to make before bringing a lawsuit. So then I wanted to just briefly talk about why Erika thought that she could bring a motion to strike here, or an anti-SLAPP motion. She said it was because she participated, or that it was based on a criminal prosecution against a plaintiff. So because she was involved in getting criminal charges filed against Chris, that is protected speech, and then the lawsuit should be dismissed on that basis.
Yeah. I mean, she essentially is arguing that, and we'll go into this in more detail when we talk about what the court said about this, which is, Ceci said, you kind of get a preview of how the court may rule, because the court had them have a hearing on this where each side got to make pretty extensive oral arguments. And so we got to see the questions the court was asking before the court ruled on it. And essentially, Erika was arguing, look, he admitted to making mistakes and doing things wrong, and it was reasonable for me to report this.
Yeah, which we'll read her declaration for that. But basically, the whole point of this lawsuit is that Chris thinks this shouldn't have happened at all. He should not have been under any criminal investigation for what occurred. And she's saying, well, I reported this to the Secret Service. I was reporting it to an executive branch of the government and investigators. That is protected activity. So we'll see what the court says. And then she has to make the argument that Chris will not succeed on his claims. And we'll see what the court says there too. I thought it would be interesting to go into Erika's declaration because we focused so much on Chris's side of things that it's only fair to balance it out with what Erika says happened.
Right. Okay. So she gives some of the background that she's already given, but she says, around 2007, I decided to reignite my singing career. Now, I don't know what singing career she had before, but according to this, she's reigniting it. I began to perform at nightclubs around the country, primarily for LGBTQA plus audience. As part of building my image as Erika Jayne, I would wear fun, playful, and sparkly outfits for my performances.
She said that Tom gave her an American Express credit card during what?
I think so there's a typo, but
that's a big
just
typo.
To make people feel better, attorneys also are human and make mistakes, and sometimes things aren't caught.
Yeah.
And so it says Tom Girardi gave me an American Express credit card during our credit card, which might be a Freudian slip because she viewed the marriage as a credit card. She clearly meant to say marriage there.
Yeah. Yeah, it was probably supposed to say during our marriage, or our relationship. Tom Girardi gave me an Amex credit card during our credit card, including for the purposes of restarting my singing and performing career. Oh, he gave it to her. Wait, oh my gosh. They're definitely going to use this against her at some point.
Oh yeah, totally.
That was the firm card. And she says it was for purposes of restarting my singing and performing career.
I mean,
well, we knew that.
The thing is, this is all filed in federal court under, the potential for Rule 11 sanctions. This is actually a declaration by Erika. So it's under the penalty of perjury saying, I certify that this is true. But there are so many other legal things with what she says, including the California Franchise Tax Board and the IRS, that can eventually use this against her in some way if something she says down the line doesn't match up.
Oh my God. Okay. 8. As with all our finances, Tom Girardi did not authorize me to access the credit card account and did not provide me with passwords, credit card statements, or transaction records. I did not know how much I spent per month or per year. Girardi Keese paid my Amex credit card bill every month. That's not good.
Well, I think she's kind of short-sighted thinking, because it's sort of, I need to get out of this. And how can I get in trouble if I can say I didn't have access to it, so I didn't know how much I was spending? But then it's also like, if you don't know how much you're spending, how can you for sure make a claim that you think someone's stealing from you, even though because you weren't paying attention to it during the time. It's difficult. And then there's also, if there's the IRS or whoever else is going to be like, this was a scheme to avoid paying taxes, you just don't know how these things are going to be potentially used against her in the future.
Well, I mean, she's also setting it up to be like, I was completely blind to who was paying for it or where the funds came from to pay for it. But yet she's admitting here that the funds were used to pay for her singing career.
Right.
The firm funds.
Yeah.
So she's trying to like keep an arm's distance away from the payments of it, but it's ultimately, in my opinion, hurting her.
Yeah, because it's, where did the firm funds come from? Because we know now that they were coming from client settlement payouts that were supposed to go to people who had been injured or whatever else in these big cases that he had.
Right.
She goes and she explains hiring Mikey Minden and Leia as her assistants, and talks about how she started filming for the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And then she says her work schedule also became busier. What is her work schedule? Like filming for Beverly Hills?
Beverly Hills. Yeah. So then she says that she was contacted in 2009 by the Secret Service because of an investigation of Gabriella, who's an esthetician based in Beverly Hills, suspected of carrying out a credit card scam on her clients. The Secret Service knew that I had been Gabriella's client and asked to interview me. She says she was contacted about a Secret Service scam with her esthetician, and she got interviewed concerning some credit card related crimes. And that's when she learned that the Secret Service investigates credit card fraud.
Yeah. Okay.
She's like, let me just keep that in my back pocket for later.
So she talks about first meeting Marco Morante, and then she talks about discussing having Marco design performance costumes. And she said that Mikey and I thought that working with Marco would make good budgetary sense. Before meeting Marco, I had my costumes made by Sylvia's Costumes, a well-known and decades-old costumer based in Hollywood, California. Sylvia's Costumes was expensive. Marco was an up-and-coming designer with a much smaller clientele in 2014. And I believed they would be a lower cost alternative to Sylvia's Costumes. All right, a little commentary here. I just have to say, I don't believe that. And I would have a field day with this in her deposition. I mean, the amount of statements she's made where she says she never paid attention to how much something cost. She wasn't paying any attention. And then she doesn't really dispute that she never looked at any of the invoices. Also, Marco was designing costumes for some of the most famous people that would appear on the VMAs and everywhere else. So I don't know. I find this to be not credible.
Yeah. And then when you look at, no shade to any of the designers here, but even just looking at like the websites, it's just different types of outfits. So I can't even imagine how she would think that Marco's are cheaper or more inexpensive than Sylvia's costumes. Yeah. But like, hook it up. I love a good costume.
Right. I mean, but this would be something where if I was the opposing counsel on this, I would be highlighting this and probably have 3 to 5 pages of examination questions just on that paragraph 16 alone.
Yeah, agreed. She then talks about how she had Mikey and Leia order costumes for herself, but never for her background dancers, except for 1 or 2 special occasions, such as when we shot a music video. She said, we did not need highly stylized bespoke costumes for the dancers, and we did not want to spend designer prices on the dancers' costumes. So this is something new. Now she's bringing in the backup dancers. So maybe she's going to push it off to them.
Yeah, and here's another thing that I think is telling. And she says, until late 2016, I did not suspect Marco of any wrongful conduct. I continued to trust Marco and praised Marco's designs on my social media. So from 2014 to 2016, pretty much by her own admission, and not necessarily in that statement, but later on, she admits she wasn't looking at any of the receipts. And then we're about to read in the next paragraph, she says, sometime in 2016, Tom Girardi began to complain to me on multiple occasions that I was spending too much on my Amex card. Now, again, he doesn't say, I think someone's stealing from you. He says you're spending too much money. And it doesn't occur to her to just maybe spend less money.
No, the obvious thing to do is to say, I think someone is stealing from me. Like, duh. She said, my husband's complaints concern me. Although I had no visibility into our finances, Tom Girardi had not otherwise complained about financial problems, nor had he mentioned to me that he or his law firm had needed to take on debt or that they were behind on any outstanding debt obligations. Wow, it doesn't faze you that a law firm is paying your humongous Amex bill. Just not weird. I'm shocked that you guys don't have more money to give me.
And look, Erika does have some decent arguments here, but the facts just are not on her side. And that's the commentary we're giving right now. She has some decent legal arguments that are made very eloquently, honestly, by her attorney. Mm-hmm. But the facts, especially when we've watched the show, we've paid attention, and we've been covering this for what, like 4 years now? 3 years? 3 years? Yeah.
We haven't been around that long.
But we know that she did know in 2016 that there were some issues. And this paragraph 23 would be another instance where I would have a ton of examination questions on.
Agreed. The next paragraph, she said, when I asked TG, Tom Girardi, what charges he was referring to, all he did was mention high dollar amounts with no specifics. I don't think the costumes were the only high dollar amount. And I'm going to go back and look at, because we have that credit card charges. And I'm going to see, because I remember we did like the best of, where we were posting them on Instagram. Yeah. I'm going to go find it.
Because that's as a trial attorney, as someone who litigates cases, which, by the way, I didn't even talk about this on the podcast, but I just won a jury trial in Dallas County. So very proud of myself about that.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's almost like you're a shark and this is just chum in the water, because we'd be like, okay, so there were complaints about high Amex charges. Then you get the entire Amex bill in discovery and you're like, well, what about this charge for, $10,000 for blah, 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 or this charge for, I don't know, or the $40,000 you were spending on glam. It didn't occur to you that maybe some of those were the large charges that Girardi was complaining about?
This is from the New York Times, and it says that in a court filing, the expenses were enumerated in a 6-page exhibit and included at least $850,000 on hair, makeup, and nail stylists, at least $1.3 million on promotion and marketing, and $14 million in American Express charges. Okay, I found the exhibit. So it's Doc 12, and it was in a case the trustee brought against Erika within the bankruptcy to try and get some of the funds or sort out where the money went. And our memory was almost there. So this exhibit shows that Girardi Keese made payments into EJ Global receivable account. And we've discussed this in an episode where we went over the bankruptcy early on in our podcast. The American Express credit card charge is just one of the many payments made into the EJ Global receivable account by Girardi Keese. And the American Express payment had a net amount of $14,259,012.84. So we don't actually know what those American Express charges were, but a $14 million Amex bill for the period 2008 to 2020. I'm assuming the costumes weren't the only large charges she was charging on her Amex. But in case you're curious, this is other net payments in the EJ Global receivable account. The next highest one is for McDonald Selznick Association, Inc. for $1.5 million. Kid Squared, Inc. for $860,000. Greenberg Traurig, which is a law firm, for $260,000. Block Talent Agency for $171,000. There's a photographer for $134,000. Center Staging Musical Production, Inc., $75,000. MVA Public Relations Group, $55,000. Apollo Jets, is that for the private plane? $45,000. Go To Talent Agency, Inc., $30,786. Okay, so this really has nothing to do with the Marco Marco case. I just wanted to go walk down memory lane and see if we could figure out what some of the other Amex charges were. These aren't, like I just said, these aren't the Amex charges. The Amex charges are $14 million. And then these are other payments that they allege Erika or EJ Global received. So Again, if you're interested in learning more about the bankruptcy proceedings, we've covered those at length in prior episodes, and the bankruptcies are still going on. So I feel like when things slow down, we will have to do an episode where we go back to the bankruptcies. Anyway, back to Marco Marco.
Some of this repeats some of the stuff that we've kind of talked about before. So she talks about on September 18, 2016, I performed in Dallas, Texas at the Pride Festival. But she says in here that Mikey called Chris Facilla and talked to him, and that Mikey reported back that Chris said the charges were a mistake and would be fixed. She said, I was surprised at the incident because I did not expect Marco Marco to make this kind of mistake. Well, if you've never looked at a single invoice, how would you know? And you don't have access to your account. So like, that's okay. And she's like, at the time, I believe this was a one-off incident. So from like about 2014 to 2016, when did they start using him?
I think 2014. Yeah.
So they have had all of these charges for a couple years where she doesn't even want to look at an invoice. She's not worried about the cost. She's saying, make things look more expensive, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your huge client calls you up and says, hey, I think there's an overcharge. And you're like, oh my gosh, there must be a mistake. Let me look at it. I'll fix it. She's on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. She could make this an entire storyline on the show because she has that platform. We haven't seen Marco Marco bring that up really in here. He's been very sort of restrained about bringing up the fact that she was on the show and things like that. But that has to be in the back of your mind when you are a small business owner and you're dealing with someone with that kind of platform. So then she talks about how she received mobile notifications from Amex after she gets access to it and all of that. So we won't go into that again. But she says she's getting mobile notifications of pending charges from Amex, which also, by the way, she's putting her cell phone at issue here. Now this is relevant in discovery. All of these, not that they weren't anyway, but now she's going to have a very hard time saying that this stuff is not relevant or that he shouldn't get all of it.
Yeah, image the phone, baby. Give it to us.
Right, and she's saying, oh, I never worried about cost of finances. Well, then if I'm the attorney on the other side, I'm going to be like, all right, well, I want all of your credit card bills. I want all of your text messages, including the text messages with Tom Girardi. I want all of this stuff because she's putting it at issue. So this is all being opened up in discovery, or should be, by her own declaration.
Daisies didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, then she says in November 2016, she got a mobile notification from Amex for a pending charge of $4,500 to Marco under we. That's just like a label of the charge. She said she received both alerts in the middle of the night. She was alarmed by the charges because I did not have any upcoming shows for the remainder of the year, and I was not aware of placing or authorizing orders for new costumes. She says she then called Mikey to let him know about the new alerts and pending charges and asked him to contact Marco immediately to find out what was going on.
Soon after, Mikey informed me that he had texted Chris of Marco and that Chris had responded by text saying, okay, this is in quotes, okay, that is very wrong. WTF is going on, ! I'm sorry, I'm calling them now. And then Mikey told me that he further texted, they have both been returned and I have instructed them to delete the card they had. Going forward, I will reach out to you when it's time to process and I will process myself. I'll have Marco reach out later today with the actual price of the garment as both of those seem too high. And then he said, I had the same issue with another client a week ago. My apologies, time for a new bookkeeper. And then Mikey tells Erika that he texted Chris to let him know that, quote, Erika is going back through all other Marco charges to make sure there have been no other mistakes previously. And so she says, by this point, Chris had admitted to 3 unauthorized charges totaling multiple thousands of dollars on my Amex credit card within a span of 2 months, which is her characterization of it.
So she says at some point she talks to Mr. Sela directly, or Chris directly, and she said she doesn't recall the specific discussion, but it was around end of November, beginning of December 2016. She said she was talking to Leah about it the same day about the new Marco charges and wanted to check whether Chris had actually reversed the charges and instructed Leah to log into my online Amex account and to search my statements. Leah showed me a long list of charges to Marco on my Amex account. She explained that she had searched my Amex transactions between 2015 and 2016 using the search term, quote, Marco, and had found some charges to Marco. She told me that she ran a second term using the term Marco, which resulted in more transactions between 2015 and 2016. Leah told me that the total amount of charges was almost $1 million.
Hey, legal team, we have to stop here for now. We have, I think, about 2 additional hours on this fascinating case that we've recorded that we're working to edit. We wanted to go ahead and get at least part of it out for you now. Stick around. We're going to try to get this out sooner rather than later, hopefully within the next day or so. So I hope you're enjoying this, and I promise you we are doing our best. Thank you so much. Bye.